I was going to, in a minute, say something else with the opening verbal gambit having to do with in what way you might describe this kind of activity. As has happened before, it also brings to mind the possibility of pointing out all of the things this is not. But I've done that before, but now you people can do it yourself, such as pointing out that this is the only thing in the world without a premise. But even that, of course, if you're going to look at it from a fairly local view, which would not be untoward in this matter, you could say, well, wait a minute, that is the premise. You're just saying it doesn't have a premise, or this has no purpose. So the purpose has got to be it's the only thing that has no purpose, etc., because you're locked into that kind of closed-in verbal intellectual loop. This is still the preface. We hadn't started. So rather than me commenting again, or even you going off on that kind of, perhaps entertaining tangent about all the things this is not, how about consider this? Instead of taking that as being either some strange corner, some perhaps interesting sidelight to this, or perhaps some confusing motion, rather than just identifying something that can't be, or all the things it's not, instead of just identifying this as being that example, look at you. Look at all the things you are not. And don't just be Saturday morning cartoon clever and say, well, of course I am not an eggplant. Now, all of the things, all of the descriptions that permeate human intelligence, that other people seem to be, everybody being driven to continually talk about the kind of guy they are. So all of the things that other people describe themselves as being, all the other ways that people describe the possibilities that they could be, then all the ones that you bring up as being a possibility, or that you used to be, or that you plan to be, all of the verbally describable things that humans could be, that seem to be open to anybody that made enough effort, had enough talent. Out of that whole pool, look at all of the things you're not. At least you take me saying all the things this is not, in some ways being curious, or you don't see the point. Look at all the things that you're not. Need I say more? Certainly not. If you were ever going to give this some operational name or description, here's another one, since we'll never use it, but it'll get us going somewhere, or get you pointed in some direction. I will trust, being the foolish, trusting person I am. 1189 operational name that will never be used. Here it comes, quote, the continual thinking when you don't have to. And that's all for this evening. I know I've done that before. The continual thinking when you don't have to. Of course, I intend by thinking in this context to be somehow distinguishable from the kind of thinking that everyone does, the kind of thinking that everyone is engaged in at the point of purchase wherein you meet life's ordinary flow at this level. Now, all of you that's been around a little bit here, and if you belong involved with this, all of you have got to simply realize this, that in a quite real sense, when it comes to thinking, you can coast through life. I am not trying to play with words, and for me to say I'm not is almost falling into, if you're ordinary people with ordinary ears, would fall into saying, well, this doesn't have a premise, and then ordinary ears says, well, that is a premise. For me to say this has got to, when I say thinking is in some way distinguishable from ordinary thinking, and then I can say, but I don't mean that in some sort of weird sense or in some kind of mystical sense. It is quite chemical, and of course electrical, but it is very chemical, it is very material. And for me to say that you can coast through life, that is not some broad painted stroke of condemning or attacking ordinary people as being dumb or stupid, because there are people in life quite equipped to get by and to do what they should in life, and I can identify them. Everybody! But if you belong involved with this, you have got to understand by now, you've got to realize this, that there is a kind of intellectual activity that perhaps either you have suspected, tasted, slid around in, tripped over once or twice, or can actually seem to lapse into on more than periodic occasions nowadays. And you do realize that it is not the same thing as coasting through life. It's staggering around, and this is not as pejorative as it sounds, but I'm having to verbally distinguish again, that you, a president of a corporation, of a country, being a parent, you can stumble through life and not be involved with the kind of thinking that I'm talking about. You can do it almost in a dream. You can do it almost in a fog. You are on automatic. It is the point of purchase. It is the retail outlet of life's ordinary energy run to the intellect. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to look for a sale. You don't have to fight the crowds. All you got to do is stay alive. As long as you're alive, you can coast intellectually. You do not have to think when you don't have to. You don't really have to think once you understand that there is another way to think. And for you people just getting this for the first few times on tape at some other time in some other place, let me say again, I am not here now to offer you a premise that I'm going to describe in some way that, yes, there are better ways to think, and thank God you found me, because I have my little book here for sale, and here it is. There is no verbalized premise on this kind of thinking. And anytime there is, you're back to the ordinary locale of you intellectually interfacing with life the same as everyone else does. It is a form of coasting. You think, if you're alive, you think, but the thinking requires no effort. With ordinary people, you're back to a something with no premise, because to tell ordinary people that, at the very least, is meaningless. And probably what little attention they'd give to it, they would just discount it, and probably discount you as being out of your tree in one way or the other. Because they do think. They're thinking to hear you say that, you don't think. Yeah, right. Now, where'd you come from? So if that is the only thought you know, it is absolutely useless to talk to people that there is another kind of thinking. And if they stop for a second and find this of any interest, most people that would find even an ephemeral interest in what you're saying would take it as being, oh, you're talking about some sort of, and then they would begin to talk about altered states or something mystical, something that is just absolutely removed from ordinary thought, whereas it's not. You could find it as being a kind of temporary reflection, the ideas that people have had of some sort of altered state, or that people have from certain drug use, or even people on a very low level that only happens a few times, that people can get off of alcohol when they first start. That chemically their brain is operating in a way that the normal stimuli of life, that is the point of purchase where you are being driven by life's ordinary primal flow, just a little alcohol, something not cheap, a little decent pot, lots and lots of coffee if you're not used to it, just all sorts of things. Extreme fatigue will change the ordinary brain chemistry, and you can believe, hey, I'm having weird thoughts. I never thought about this before. I never thought in this particular way. I've never felt like this. All they're talking about is my brain chemistry is out of the ordinary. But other than that, to tell people that there is another way to think, if they paid any attention at all, it would be on the basis they assumed you meant some sort of, and this is the most common phrase still in currency, is some altered state. And the altered state, as far as they're concerned, is something far removed from ordinary thought. Either drug-induced, chemically induced, or if they were of a spiritual, wired-up turn of mind, they would think, well, you're talking about some way in that the gods or dead spirits or cosmic forces take over your brain and whisper great messages like, God is love. The basis for this, if this had a basis that was describable, would be closer to what I just opened up with. That is, this could be called, which is not, but this could be called the continual thinking when you don't have to. Not, notice, I'm not saying not some sort of far removed spiritual thinking, whereas everyone else is involved with mundane thought. Or some kind of loving Christian, Jewish, Muslim, any kind, New Age thought as opposed to Old Age thought. Let me repeat it again. It would be the continual thinking when you don't have to. Now notice, the only thing resembling, well, it's not resembling, it actually does, but adverbally, operating I guess is almost an adjective, is continual. It doesn't say better thinking, it doesn't say higher modes of thinking, it doesn't say more spiritual thinking, it doesn't say more intellectual thinking, it doesn't say anything other than continual thinking. When? When you don't have to. And when is that? All the time. There is no special occasion. Whereas again, if ordinary people heard this at all and showed any interest, they would say, well, you're talking about something like if you had a problem, if you're trying to break through to some kind of higher plane of thought or spirituality or some shit like that. I'll repeat again, which is my privilege since I made it up, since I discovered it. Continual thinking when you don't have to. But when you don't have to is all the time. It's only ordinary people, if they listen to this at all and find it of interest, would believe, well, this would have some specific purpose. You would have to be referring to certain occasions when this would be proper, when it might be useful. Continual thinking when you don't have to, which is all the time. Because all the time you do not have to think. All you got to do is do what you're doing now. Now you can call that thinking, which is fine with me, if you're ordinary. That is what is going on anyway. It is not open to any useful partitioning for me to divide up into local pieces and say, well, ordinary thought is better or worse over here. That kind of coasting through life, that kind of like the little plastic animals that will go downhill of going like that through life, there's no way to profitably say, well, all right, some of that's good, but this one's not good. It's all on the same level. It's all coasting. It is all just doing as you're going to do. It is life's own energy making you think, making the brain operate chemically, and you taking that, your reactions, your automatic reactions here to this apparent stimuli out there, is you take that as being thinking. Now if you do, there's no way out, which is fine with me, because I'm not a locksmith, so it's not going to hurt my business. But what I am talking about is something else. And rather than try and point in some specific way that would be quantitatively so much different, which it would, but rather than do that, I go back for the fifth time and say the continual thinking when you don't have to. And then I said when you don't have to is all the time. Not specifically, not segregating out parts of the ordinary thinking process through one's life and saying, well, at times it's good, or on these occasions it's good, or for this purpose. It's all the same vis-a-vis this. All the same. Some people seem to think better than others, seem to think more efficiently. Some seem to want to think about certain areas and people in other areas. Taken in toto, you have got the collection that defines human intelligence. And you individually are of no importance in it. Of course, you're ordinary, you think it is. And you may have the red ass about it. You may not like it. But you're taking whatever life is stimulating your brain to do, you take that as being specific, willful, comprehensive, or at least best you can, thinking. This, if it had a name, my version for 1189 would be the continual thinking when you don't have to. Now, many of you like that before I repeat it 6 times. But you've heard it before. I just didn't use those terms. That's what all this has been about. There is no discernible pool of people that life is wired up in such a way to actually think about thinking. Now, people talk about thinking, they write about it, but people are not wired up. There is no, I can say sizable segment, but that is not even the important aspect. They're not discernible. That is, it is not important enough that they are visible, that they are discussed, that they are publicly identifiable, that they act as a magnet. They're normally just people here and there, and they're not in much contact with one another necessarily. They don't know what it means. But ordinarily, you do not have any collection, any magnetic hold on a group large enough presently. And presently has been true presently for thousands of years now. Of people wired up in such a way as to think about thinking. To actually think about thinking, from one view, is too labor intensive. Well, those of you that, and I'll assume most of you that's been around here now, you've got some notion of what I'm talking about tonight. In a sense, not in a depressive sense, and not in a sense would cause you to avoid it, or you still wouldn't be here, but in a quite real sense, it takes effort to do this kind of thought. It takes effort to do this kind of thought as opposed to what ordinary people would think I'm talking about when they say, well, I do think. And then if I was foolish enough to even be talking to them, I'd say, oh, yeah, but it doesn't require any effort. And they'd say, well, yeah, it does. In fact, I worry about having to pay my bills. I worry about how I'm going to have to pay my children's way to college. I worry about how I'm going to pay off my first 2 wives, keep the alimony. They would say, I worry. And to them, that's the effort of thinking. Is I have to sit around once a month, and I have to refigure, how am I going to pay off part of these bills? How am I going to keep up master charge and the fee? They call that the effort of thinking. And it's not, for those of you that know. The thinking that I'm talking about, that is the continual thinking when you don't have to. That requires effort. By its very description, if you can hear it. As you're thinking, that is, you're doing something, I'm inferring, and that most of you understand, something other than the ordinary mental activities of the brain. Since that requires no effort, since you literally can coast through life, even if you are wringing your cerebral hands, you're still coasting. As opposed to that takes effort, because the very description, to continually be thinking when you don't have to, that shows it takes effort. It might help to have some basis to try and climb up on this. When I say that people, there are not sizable, discernible numbers of people that life is wired up to actually think about thinking, the human organism is wired up to think about the operations of the lower, that is, the more simplistic, what I at times have wanted to call the red and the blue circuits, what appears to be just the motor activities of the body, or the limbic, just the automatic emotional responses that help keep a person alive in the ordinary sense. Those two areas are apparently much thought of, much discussed, but in the sense that people talk about their health, for instance, which is just about covers the motor areas. As big a hobby as that is with humans, and as much as people talk about their likes and dislikes, their emotional life, their love life, their sex life, the way their fellow humans in the slaughter queue seem to treat them. As much as people talk about that, now all of you can understand that, then go back to what I said, although your ordinary intellect could have disagreed to begin with, people are not wired up to automatically think about thinking. So take what the reason I brought it up, that people will talk about and think about just the red circuits of the body. Just the basic motor, biological, physiological operations of the body. People will think about that. Just notice. If you just coast, how much you would normally think about it. How much you thought about it before you started doing whatever this is, if you're doing it. And then how much you would think about, and how much other people think about. How much the human verbal intercourse has taken up with discussing the two more primitive areas, relatively speaking, of the body itself, and then apparently just ordinary emotions. So now think about that a second. That's clear enough, is it not? Now back to what I said, people are not wired up to think about thinking. Do people talk about thinking? Now if you were real ordinary in this big enough crowd, somebody might say, no, wait a minute, people do talk about thinking. But whatever example they'd come up with, if I got to do it for you, just within a split second you should be able to see through it that they're not talking about thinking, they're talking about feeling. They may say, boy, it preys on my mind. I think a lot about the way my first wife insulted me, or the way that a lot of women treat me, and I think that that's not right for other people to treat me this way just because I'm a male or a female, or just because I'm a Muslim here living in, Beirut. But if you listen, they're not talking about thinking. Now, insofar as the relative validity, temporary and as arbitrary as it is, but as useful as it can be, to divide up the human organism into the my red, yellow, and blue circuits, into the motor and the limbic and the cortical areas of the nervous system and the total organism, people are not wired up to talk about the latter, the last one. They just don't. People do not. You could look at it this way. Once, if I had ordinary people and I could catch their attention just right, and they go, yeah, you're right, I never thought about that. Then they wouldn't find that curious, but you should. Because at first, ordinary intelligence would disagree with me. They would say, well, people do think about thinking. People talk about it. People write books about it. People go to school to study about thinking. No, listen to me. Think about it for a second. I'm talking about the kind of thinking that you don't have to think about. Because if you're going to say, yeah, they do, that ain't thinking. See, that was the ordinary. You coasted to that. When I said, people don't think about thinking, and you went, Jesus, you're crazy. That's coasting. This would be to continually think, right, here's an example, when you didn't have to. See, because you don't have to if you're ordinary. I said people don't think about thinking. Yeah, they do. All right, so you don't have to think anymore. You already know that, yeah, they do. To do this, you should think some more about it. See, because you don't have to. If you're ordinary and I said, people don't think about thinking, you go, oh, yeah, they do. All right, that's it. Now to do this, you got to think some more about it. But notice you don't have to, because you already know the answer. The answer is that I'm wrong. That people do think about thinking. But if this had a name for the night, 1189, I'll do it. Cease. Continual thinking when you don't have to. And here's a point. Here's a prime example. Well, I assume enough of you followed that. People do not think about thinking. And those of you that got it, you should find it curious. I'll pause again for just a second, that you never actually thought about it. And that if you didn't think about it unnecessarily, your response would be that that's not true. That actually the kind of things I just been through, that people not only think about it, they discuss it, they debate it, they write about it, they study it, they get degrees in it. No, they don't. People are not wired up to think about thinking. That within itself would require unnecessary effort. It would require actual effort to think about thinking. And then if in some way you could induce ordinary people to do it, they couldn't get anywhere, which is what much of Western and Eastern, but Western philosophy is based on. They didn't know how to describe it. But I think I'm going to try and think about what's actually the nature of life, or especially what's the nature of human thinking. And they do this, and after that, if you try to read it and you're ordinary, it comes out more or less, ordinary people would say, is gibberish. That it just goes round and round. It's somebody just chasing their tail, they're just wasting their time. What's that got to do with life? And that's the only possible outcome at that level. Because they're trying to think about thinking without having, from life's view, from life's need, without actually having the right or the necessary impetus. They're not motivated enough to do it, and it's just sort of a spectator sport. Except they're not even spectatoring on their own intelligence. They end up and they're not thinking about thinking. If a person had an active, an omnidirectional, a non-parochial intellect, it would be only there that would separate somebody actually doing this from the dilettantes. It would be having a continual, an active, non-chauvinistic, in the full sense of the word, intellect that would truly divide a real explorer from an armchair traveler. Because you can think about this, whether you apparently got some of it from these tapings, or whether you got it from a book, or whether you thought, well, it just came to me that there's something other, not necessarily out there in life, but there's something other, there's some possibility in me. If not everybody, at least it's in me, and it's about to drive me crazy, like the old urban tale of the person with a bursted eardrum and the ants got under their scalp and they went crazy trying to scratch and they didn't know why. That's the way I feel sometimes, some people say. But where do I go to scratch it? People can think they're thinking about this. But if they're coasting, unless they're involved with the continual thinking when you don't have to, then you're a dilettante, which is just a hobby. There's nothing wrong with it. You're an armchair explorer. Even if you're not sitting at home, even if you go out somewhere, even if you went and chased down what you thought was this kind of activity on the other side of the world, you're still a dilettante. And it doesn't matter that you can say, well, I sold everything I had. I had to work my way on a tramp steamer. And those tramps almost drove me crazy getting over there. And I had to lie to get into certain countries. I had to bluff my way through. I had to really put forth intellectual effort. You know, people that believe that will believe almost anything. People like that probably play the stock market. Buy gold when it's going up. Or when it's going down. At least anybody don't think I was sending out some sort of subliminal hint. All such activity that people could say that they had been through still would not be involved with thinking. There's only one way to know that if you have ever done, if you were involved with this, by tonight's definition. That is, the continual thinking when you don't have to. It's only when you've done that. It's only when you have had your own experience enough of some of my past descriptions of trying to be, if you looked at consciousness as being some sort of light, instead of looking at something as have a continual sweep like a lighthouse. But it'd have to be even past the point of ordinary spatial time, but even at best for me to describe it physically, here comes the gesture again, that you're doing this, which would be unnecessary, right? That is, if what we're trying to do is consider here, we have somebody over here who is attacking my political ideas, my religious, attacking my family, talking about my mama, whatever it is. So if that's the thing if that's the thing stimulating me and getting my attention, if I'm going to think about it and come up with some conclusion or figure it out, is to look at it, right? Seems reasonable enough to me, so that's all for tonight. No, that is coasting. See, in other words, you're already drawn there, and it doesn't matter once you understand whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you're looking at this in an adversarial manner, or whether you're looking at it with favor. You just automatically did it. Nothing wrong with that. This kind of activity is not some sort of blanket indictment on people automatically living. Because up to a certain point, you should be automatically living. Up to a certain point, that is up to here, more or less, it should be just run automatically. And just forget about it. But then if you get intellectual up to that level, and then we're saying, well, here's an area that interests you, or you say it is. And I say, okay. Then you would say, all right, the way to think about it, to get something out of it, is to look at it. Is to study it. Scrutinize it, and all the other synonyms that start with S, which I don't want to go into. At least your mama's watching. The thinking when you don't have to would be to... I'm doing a physical example, and for those of you who missed it, instead of waving my arm, as I say that you're still studying it, you're still interested, you are still, of course if you know how to do this, you would no longer be. Your interest has moved to another order. Your interest is not simply now, oh, wait a minute, this person is making a frontal attack on something I truly believe in. That's the coast. That's the automatic. Then let us say, you begin to put into operation, my description tonight, is you then engage in a continual kind of thinking when you don't have to. And you understand you don't have to because life is already thought for you. Down at your point of purchase individually, life's already told you, I don't like that. All right, that's been established. Forget it. Now we're talking about something else. All you have to do is glance over there and stare at that for a second. You don't have to worry about, well, I got to stare at this a long time. I've got to study this. I've got to consider the various views this person is bringing up. I've got to consider all of my possible responses. No, you don't. As soon as they said something, as soon as somebody hollered out, fuck socialism. And you went, what? You know, being the good socialist as you are, you go, what? There's nothing else to think about. Now, if you're ordinary and trying to respond to this, and I'll speak for ordinary intelligence, you could say, yes, there is, because I don't want to just blanketly condemn them condemning me. I want to think about it. No, you don't. That's what you might want to call thinking about thinking. You're not going to think anymore. You're not supposed to. You don't have to. It's not necessary. They hollered, the hell with the Democrats. You went, what? There it is. There was your thinking. Now, that's it. So there's nothing to be gained once you understand this to say, well, now you've got to look at it. And don't give me those gestures about some kind of omnidirectional, intelligence. You got to look at this and maybe question the people. Maybe even take a step back and consider, well, maybe I was too hasty. Maybe there is some validity, some minor validity to his attack on my fervor for socialism or the Democratic Party. Any of you who know anything know better than that. Your reaction has already been played out. You have already bought the product. You have already sampled it. There you are in the grocery store, apparently, with all these plurality of choices, and this nice little lady with a thing on toothpicks says, here, would you like that? And you open your mouth or your brain, and it goes, yes. What do you mean? What do you mean talking that way about socialism? There appears to be choice. It appears to be a free market that you can pick out anything you want in the store, and yet somebody is always there. That is life. That is the point. Your point of purchase will life's flow, and and it goes boom, and you take it as being you. If you could put into operation any of what I'm talking about being able to continually thinking when you don't have to, would be, you got to go past this. It's not to try and twist it, to reinterpret it. It's not to try and reanalyze it. It's just, that is what life made you do. That was, you turned around and you opened your mouth and somebody, crowned one of these little pieces of cheese with a piece of pickled sausage or something in your mouth, and you had no choice. There's nothing to think about. The continual thinking then that you wouldn't have to do would be this. It's what I mean by the sweep of my arm and the omnidirectional, even though that's limited, even in its own description, would be you're not even looking at that. It's like you have moved up to another floor somewhere and you're looking on you, the other person, the entire milieu that seemed to have brought this about. And then you're not even looking just at that. And I'm not going to tell you more what you're looking at, because those of you that know anything, I don't have to tell you more. And those of you that perhaps up to this point find this to all be insane, there's nothing I can say right now that can make it more sane except to say you may still be interested in this, but not on the basis of the attack on socialism, not on the basis of your response to it, but not discluding that, not excluding it. But then you've got to, even if you're still interested in this, you can be interested in that, but you have got to then take a completely, as much as you can, universal view. Which would mean what? Think about everything in the world and that. That's what. Omnidirectional, non-parochial, that you can still be using that as the springboard of your own inquiry of some kind, but this per se, at that original level, that is the coasting level, this is no consequence. Never was, never will be, if you're doing with this. If you're fooling with this, all that's of no consequence. Any more than any hobby. Somebody attacking your social beliefs, well, I don't mean to downplay it, it's no less important than somebody attacking, Bruckner. If you had that kind of Germanic taste in music, or James Gottlieb Brown. To do this kind, to follow what I was describing as the non-description of this, you would have to be able to loose yourself, to find out how to break away from the kind of hold that is truly a monopolistic hold that the last time we were taping I was describing to you as another kind of universal fission conspiracy, that you got to free yourself from that, which manifests itself in each and every binary thought that a person has. That wasn't that viscid, obtuse. All right, weird. Try it another way. To be able to continually think when you don't have to, one way to try and get another toehold, neurally speaking, is to realize that you have got to be free from every manifestation of the fission conspiracy, which is always in operation whenever you're coasting, because if you're coasting, your brain sees everything dichotomously. Now you know that by now. That is the basis of language, that is the basis chemically of thought in the three-dimensional world, is a balance, a struggle between whatever. True, false, up, down, right, wrong, male, female, etc. Yin, yang, and I guess that'd be the opposite. That is the basis. That is the inescapable material, physiological basis of the human organism. Not just the brain, but all of you should know this by now. You have got that kind of struggle, and at times it appears to be some sort of cooperation, and at times I normally refer to it as an inescapable dance of everything. The human intellect cannot see, under ordinary conditions, anywhere past this shared monopoly between trying to breathe, trying to inhale, and you've got to deal with the atmospheric pressure on this planet. You're trying to stay upright and to keep your spine from collapsing in such a way that you end up as a poster child for chiropractors. Wow! While the gravity of this planet is trying to, sink you down. And if you intellectually trying to stay intelligent while being continually lured by the sirens of stupidity out there on the rocks, singing out to you and everyone else, come hither, come hither. Come lay down with us and get dumber than you are. I guess even speaking for ordinary people at times I get too flowery even for ordinary intelligence. There is no way to escape the shared monopolistic basis of the intellect. The whole body, but then let's get to the intellect, what we're talking about, of thinking. You have got to free yourself from that. You've got to at least understand the absolute captivity and that there's no way out. There is no good captivity there. There is no way to reinterpret. There is no way to twist the rules of that game. If that's as far as you go, because you can never come to a conclusion that will be in conflict to the monopolistic, although it appears to be binary, it's just a shared conspiracy, the hold of right and wrong, like you've got a choice, like it matters. Because if you can think when you don't have to, you know that we're speaking now chemically. We're speaking closer to the energy of life itself. We're speaking way beyond any sort of clothing put on words, and words being the clothing put on energy. That is, that right and decency has some kind of intrinsic value. To ordinary people it does. It's supposed to. But that is not the end of it. That is a kindergarten, first story acceptance of the energies of life. So, you are trapped in a conspiracy. Even if you believed, if you're ordinary and then had some chance to be unordinary, and I could talk to in one ear, heard ordinary, and the other ear could hear something else, which of course is what I'm trying to do all the time, some of the time, would be to understand that you are not better off if you're attempting to do whatever this is. If you're attempting to be able to think in some extraordinary way, just more fun, just a lot of fun, then you understand there is nothing to be gained by going, you're faced with, let's take away even the trappings, if possible, of morality, just of truth and falsity. All right, so if this actually has something to do with thinking ultimately, then we would have to be concerned about truth and error, right? Got to. So you would believe if there is a muse to whom I should listen, forget the serendipity singers, as appealing and as dense as they may be, to believe that I should be attracted, that I should be pursuing, that my interest should be in the truth. That's not so. It's a conspiracy, is what too many of you, well, not all of you got the last time we were taping. That is, at least for circa 1189, I suggest to you, is the up-to-date ultimate conspiracy. And no one sees it as a conspiracy. It can't be a conspiracy. Because at least in some areas of life, the fission, the division into truth and error And if you were wired up a slightly different way into goodness and ungoodness. Don't write me, I know there's no such word. But no one can see that that's a conspiracy. It doesn't even begin to compute with ordinary coasting thinking. It just is insane. Verbally I heard what you said. But now there may be conspiracies, I don't doubt that. And there may be ultimately, if you were still wired up to be more religiously or spiritually inclined to believe that there is unseen conspiracies behind things that seem to affect life, but the conspiracy is unrecognized forces of evils combined in trying to destroy man, or at least to annoy him. But when it gets down to specific areas wherein it would be at the very crux of why we might have an intellect, that is, to be able to divine the difference between the truth and that which is false. To say that there is a conspiracy there, insane doesn't begin to cover it. How about just foolish? Idiotic. By the way, by the by, may I point out to you, if there were such a thing as 3D conspiracies that so many people like to believe, do you realize that conspiracies that are actually running on 8 cylinders, when they are actually operational, if there were some, and they were actually running at good speed, what would be their PR? You wouldn't know it, but their PR would be, talk about insane. That is, it'd be referring to stories about themselves. Have you heard these kind of nutso stories that there's some kind of conspiracy having to do with us people in the locksmith trade? Ha, 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 ha. And of course that would be the guys in the conspiracy, out ridiculing it. Right? And not just saying, well, locksmiths have got to be good people. If they were in a conspiracy, by God, there'd be a darn good reason. Not that. It's just to laugh at it like, Jesus, have you ever heard of anything that crazy? Back on the main path, if there were one. The ultimate conspiracy that I care to try and describe tonight is between any area that the human intellect sees in fission, which of course is every what? Thing. If it sees it, if it thinks about it, it comes in 2 flavors. It has 2 components, but one seems to be the proper one, and one seems to be the improper. One seems to be the right one seems to be the wrong one. Remember, I've used some description in the past, the ultimate, or the easiest describable conspiracy, if there were one, out there in life. Out there. Remember, these 2 adjoining states, these countries with these 2 kings, and they're either constantly at war or in a state of preparation for war, a fear of war. And both the kings are continually having to raise up armies, raise up new taxes. And then I told you, and a lot of you heard, well, yeah, it could be true. The guys were actually 3rd cousins through a little effort it took. Once or twice a month, periodically, they get together outside over in a 3rd place somewhere, and they sit around and they have a good night drinking, talking. They even, once they have to do a little business, discuss what they've got to continue doing to keep things perking back at home. And one way to keep things bubbling along is always, if not war, which you can look at as a version of death, bad health, if not that you're actually dead, you're on the verge of dying, which is the ultimate hobby with ordinary people. That to look at this as a conspiracy with no other purpose, you would miss the point. That they could be looking at it with some 3-dimensional validity, that they're doing this for the good of their people. That their fathers, their grandfathers had learned, if peace takes over, things go downhill. There's got to be a kind of tension in the air. There's got to be something that motivates people. And what is it? And they think back, well, our fathers, you know, your father was king for a while and mine was king over here. But remember what happened. I was a child, but I can remember some of it. The Prime Minister told me, my father told me. We went there for 30 years, absolute peace. My father tried to build all kinds of grand temples, and he built all kinds of coliseums, and well, you recall, he built that one theater complex with 15 screens and real popcorn. We're talking about. And what happened? All the people got fat. Our gross national product went down. The standard of living went down. And you remember they used to get together and think about it. And they realized in a certain way, back when their fathers, our grandfathers, were involved with overt hostilities, and even just semi-overt hostilities, when there was always the smell, the threat of warfare in the air, we had more technological advancement, the arts flourished, people seemed to be more alive. Boy, that's weird, isn't it? They had another drink or two, and after a few months of meeting, one of them said, you know what we should do? You know, it's happening again to our people now. Look at them. Why don't I'll begin to pretend that I know that you are on the verge of serious sable rattling. I'm going to tell our people that I have real inside information that I can't go into, but through some of our spies, our ZYA, that's their CIA, I know that our adjoining country here is preparing to attack us. And so they tried. And life seems to improve. The people seem to be more excited. They seem to be more alive. Their little cheeks get rosy, and some of them kind of get peachy. Their step quickens. People seem just to be a certain kind of joie de vivre that they didn't have when things were just kind of, coasting. Now back to the real world. Forget all that stuff. But think, well, don't forget it all. But I've gone through all that and then say forget it, and you people got so good you went okay and then you forgot it all. No. But don't stare at it. Don't think that you know what the purpose was. Just keep looking all around it. Because the point is to realize a conspiracy could be for the good of everybody. Those being conspired against are those within these two kingdoms that started going. What if there was somebody somewhere, which if this happened in real life, me knowing the way life operates, trust me, in one of those countries somebody would say, wait a minute. And they wouldn't know why. But they'd say, I don't believe that our neighbors are really going to attack us. You know what I think? In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I see have you ever noticed the way when he turns our king his nose, have you ever noticed the difference between him and this other king? You know what I think? I don't think they're going to attack us at all. You know what I think? I think this is some kind of conspiracy. They just want to raise our taxes. I don't know what it is, but there's some kind. You know what I think sometimes? I believe that they're getting together and just plotting all this. Of course, a guy might try to write a book and go on a talk show. And there might be a few people go, wow, I always knew there was something funny going on in the world. Is that it? And this guy says, yeah. And so it would sound as though it is to our detriment that these two princes, these two kings, are plotting. They're making up all of this warfare, threats of warfare, for some kind of nefarious purpose. But what if all the people from one view benefited? All right, now, forget all that, except don't forget all of it. And let me go back to anything that the human intellect sees in duplicate, which is everything. It is a conspiracy. It doesn't intend to be, that's not the point. But to say that one is preferable, well, the truth is preferable. There is no conspiracy there. The truth is good for us. The truth is what I want. That which is an error, I don't want. I want to avoid it. That is, I'm going to follow my king. Our neighbor's error, our neighbors are to be avoided, probably stamped out. You don't understand, it's conspiracy. It's a trick. Well, I'm glad to see that at least we have as many people getting a glimmer of it tonight as we did last time. For this conspiracy to work, and every division, every duality, which is everything that the human intellect can think of, and which is affecting all other parts of the human organism. I repeat that again. It's not just some sort of fluke that's happened to the intellect. It's happened to the entire organism. It is part of the basis of three-dimensional existence. For any of it to work, though, with the intellect, you've got to remember that each of the dancing partners in every fission has truth and error. Each one of them has to claim exclusivity. And of course, you being intelligent in the coasting sense, you find, all right, truth and error cannot lay down in the same bed. If we're talking about the law of physics or a law of morality or whatever, if something is true, it's true. And of course, that which does not run parallel, that which does not track that, is not true. And I am not an idiot, I'm not a fool, I'm not going to waste my time with that which is an error. The truth has got to be exclusively true. And that which is wrong has got to be exclusively wrong. I'll fight for my country and die for my king. I'll take his word for it. He says they're going to attack us. I'll take his word for it. Does that sound familiar? My country, right or wrong? What I am driven to think is true, what I am driven to be interested in, is what's important. It's a conspiracy, though. It doesn't begin to sneak up on you at all. All right, everything that you think is true, if you're an ordinary person, any specific thing that you think is true, you do understand. If it's true, then there's some area that does not fit into that description, into that map, and so that is not true. But you do understand this. If there's some area that's not true, that does not fit in to the exclusive truth area in your map up here, you do understand that there's some other people who find that exact same area that plots on your map as being untrue as being true. You do understand that. How do you explain that? Well, they're wrong. Oh, well, nobody explained it to me that way. I didn't, yeah. The closest thing would be any functional exclusivity would simply be in the universalness of it all. That's the only thing that would be exclusive. But then you're back to where I started tonight. That is absolutely sans premise. Because where can you start from that? You can't. You just got to kind of end up there. Because you can't start from any ordinary place and go to where the only possible exclusivity in life is the universalness of it all. Because no matter where you start, you can't get there if you start where you ordinarily think. Because if you start there, then what it is you think that, and you think, all right, we've got down one thought. I got one step down. That is, I like this stuff right here. I'm on solid ground. That is, this is exclusively the place I should be standing. That is, I am coasting. That which would be closer to the universalness of it all would be the continual thinking when you don't have to. Because the thinking that you have to is whatever your local view is. All right, I got that, I got that, I got that, I agree with that, I got that. And you don't understand, it's a conspiracy. If it was really in the true sense ordinary people think the 3D world conspiracy, then every time you say, well, I agree to this, then everything that's not that, it and what you agreed to would be like the two kings. Once a month when they meet over there in that neutral territory, they're sitting up, got their feet propped up. Maybe they just got in this year's Nouveau Beaujolais. And boy, are they having a good laugh. That all their people taking it seriously. We got to prepare for the worst. We got to prepare for the best. It doesn't matter what you're preparing for. If it does not require thought, it was not necessary, you're not preparing for anything. You're simply coasting. And we're out of tape. So, tune in next week, next time.